Beijing, Forbidden City, winter of 1542. A 16-year-old concubine named Consort Duan wakes up feeling nauseous. For 3 mornings in a row now, she's vomited into a basin before dawn, hiding the evidence before the other women wake up. She knows what this means. She's pregnant. In any other palace in the world, this would be cause for celebration. A royal child. An heir. Security for her future. But this isn't any other palace. This is the Forbidden City. And Consort Duan isn't carrying the emperor's child. She's carrying the child of a palace guard she met in secret 6 months ago. A man whose name she barely knew. A man who disappeared 3 weeks ago, probably executed for some minor offense, though no one bothered to tell her. Consort Duan has 2 choices: abort the pregnancy using herbs that might kill her, or carry it to term and be executed for certain when the child is born and looks nothing like the emperor. She chooses the herbs. For days later, she's dead. Hemorrhaged to death in her sleeping quarters. The official record lists her cause of death as sudden illness. Her body is removed from the palace before sunrise. No funeral. No memorial. Just empty space where a 16-year-old girl used to exist. But here's what makes this story truly horrifying: Consort Duan was lucky. Because the women who actually got pregnant by the emperor, their fate was somehow even worse. I'm stripped history, and we uncover the brutal truths that palace walls were built to hide. If you want to know what really happened behind the golden facade of Imperial China, smash that subscribe button. Because what comes next will make you question everything you thought you knew about ancient royalty. The Forbidden City wasn't a palace. It was a prison disguised as paradise. Inside those vermilion walls lived the emperor, his empress, and anywhere from 3,000 to 9,000 women at any given time. Consorts. Concubines. Servants. Ladies-in-waiting. All trapped inside a massive complex they could never leave. Most of these women would never even see the emperor. They were just there. Background decoration for a system that valued women only for their ability to produce male heirs. But for the women who did catch the emperor's attention, pregnancy became a twisted game of survival where the prize for winning was watching your child potentially get murdered, and the penalty for losing was your own execution. Let me explain how this worked, because the system was designed with such calculated cruelty that it could only have been invented by people who genuinely did not see women as human beings. When a woman in the Forbidden City became pregnant, she faced 3 possible scenarios. Scenario 1, the pregnancy is confirmed to be the emperor's, and it's a boy. Congratulations. You might survive. Your status increases. You receive better food, better quarters, personal attendance. But you're now also a threat to every other woman in the palace who wants their son to be the heir. You've just painted a target on both your back and your unborn child's back. Scenario 2, the pregnancy is confirmed to be the emperor's, and it's a girl. Your status increases slightly, but you've failed the primary test. You'll be watched carefully during future pregnancies. If you produce too many daughters and no sons, you'll be quietly demoted, possibly poisoned, definitely forgotten. Scenario 3, the pregnancy is suspected to not be the emperor's. You're dead. Your unborn child is dead. Everyone who helped you is dead. The only question is how public your execution will be. The numbers are staggering. During the Ming dynasty alone, spanning 276 years from 1368 to 1644, historical records document over 2,000 pregnancies among imperial concubines. Of those 2,000 pregnancies, approximately 800 resulted in live births of sons. Approximately 600 resulted in live births of daughters. The remaining 600. The records list them as miscarriages, sudden illness, or simply erase them entirely. But researchers who've studied Ming Dynasty medical records, palace inventories, and private diaries of imperial physicians have uncovered a darker truth. Most of those 600 miscarriages were forced abortions or infanticides. Let me tell you about one specific woman whose story reveals just how brutal this system really was. Her name was Noble Consort Wan. She entered the Forbidden City in 1465 at age 19 as a servant to the then Crown Prince, Zhu Jianxian, who was only 2 years old at the time. She changed his diapers. She fed him. She bathed him. She raised him. When Zhu Jianxian became the Chenghua Emperor at age 16, he was already obsessed with Wan. She was 33 years old. He made her his noble consort, the highest rank below empress, and spent more nights with her than with any other woman in the palace. But Wan had a problem. She was 33 years old in an era where most women were considered past their prime for childbearing by age 25. The emperor loved her, but she needed to produce an heir to secure her position. She got pregnant in 1466. The entire palace celebrated. Finally, the emperor would have an heir. She miscarried at 4 months. She got pregnant again in 1467. Miscarried again. Pregnant. Miscarried. Pregnant. This time she carried to term. She gave birth to a son. The baby died within hours. The official record says, weak constitution. Private letters from palace physicians suggest the baby was smothered. By who? The records don't say. But they don't need to. Noble Consort Wan never got pregnant again after that. But here's where her story takes a truly dark turn. She made absolutely certain that no other woman in the palace got pregnant either. One created a network of spies, servants, eunuchs, ladies-in-waiting, whose only job was to watch the other concubines. If any woman showed signs of pregnancy, one was informed immediately. Then she would act. In 1474, a young concubine named Lady Ji became pregnant by the emperor. She was 19 years old, healthy, and from a good family. The pregnancy was legitimate. The emperor was thrilled. Wan was not. Lady Ji fell downstairs in her 6th month of pregnancy. She survived. The baby survived. 2 weeks later, Lady Ji's food taster died of poison. Lady Ji stopped eating palace food entirely and survived only on food her personal servants smuggled from outside. She gave birth to a healthy son. 3 days later, that son disappeared. Lady Ji was told her baby died of fever. His body was cremated immediately. No viewing. No ceremony. Except the baby didn't die. A eunuch named Zhang Min had smuggled the infant out of the palace and was raising him in secret in the servants' quarters, feeding him with goat's milk, keeping him hidden. For 6 years. When the emperor finally discovered his son was alive, he was overjoyed. He named the boy Crown Prince. Noble Consort Wan was furious. Within a month, Lady Ji was dead. Sudden illness. Zhang Min, the eunuch who saved the prince, beaten so severely he was crippled for life. And the young crown prince? He spent the rest of his childhood living in fear that noble consort Wan would finish what she started. She never got the chance. She died in 1487, at age 57. The emperor was so devastated by her death that he stopped eating. He died a year later, at age 40, apparently from grief. Noble consort Wan had murdered or caused the deaths of at least 11 pregnant women during her time in the palace. That we know of. The real number is likely much higher. And a system that allowed her to do this? That system continued for another 400 years. But let's talk about what pregnancy physically meant for women in the Forbidden City, because even if you survived the political dangers, the medical reality was its own nightmare. Imperial Chinese medicine in the 1400s and 1500s was advanced in some ways: herbal treatments, acupuncture, detailed understanding of anatomy. But obstetrics? The medical care of pregnant women? That was a disaster. First, the moment a woman was confirmed pregnant, she was placed under protective confinement. This meant she was moved to isolated quarters away from other women, ostensibly for her safety, but really to prevent any accusations of infidelity if something went wrong. She was forbidden from leaving those quarters for any reason. No walking in gardens. No attending ceremonies. No fresh air. Just 4 walls for 9 months. Her diet was strictly controlled. Certain foods were believed to cause miscarriages or deformities, so pregnant women ate incredibly restricted meals, mostly bland rice, specific vegetables, and herbal soups that tasted like dirt. She was examined daily by female physicians and midwives, but these exams were crude and invasive, often causing infections that would kill both mother and child. And most horrifying, if the emperor lost interest in her during the pregnancy, she could be forgotten entirely. Food deliveries would decrease. Medical attention would become sporadic. She'd essentially be left to die in childbirth with minimal help. Let me give you specific details from the diary of a palace physician named Wu Cheng, who served in the Forbidden City from 1512 to 1544. Wu Cheng documented 37 pregnancies during his service. Of those 37, 12 women died during pregnancy from various complications, infections, malnutrition, hemorrhaging. 8 women died during childbirth. 6 babies were stillborn. 4 babies died within days of birth. Only 7 pregnancies resulted in both mother and baby surviving the first year. 7 out of 37. That's an 81% mortality rate. And these were privileged women with access to the best medical care available in China at that time. Imagine what the survival rate was for lower-ranking concubines who received even less attention. Wu Qing describes one particularly horrific birth in his diary. A 22-year-old concubine named Lady Chen went into labor in the summer of 1521. The labor lasted 4 days. 4 days of continuous contractions with no pain relief except herbal teas that did nothing. By day 3, Lady Chen was delirious from pain and dehydration. The midwives could tell the baby was positioned wrong, probably breech, but they had no way to turn it. On day 4, the midwives made a decision: they would cut the baby out. Without anesthesia. Without sterilized instruments. Just a knife and desperate hope. Lady Chen died during the procedure. The baby died minutes later. Wu Qing writes that he could hear Lady Chen's screams from 3 courtyards away. He also writes that this was the 8th time he'd witnessed this exact scenario. The 8th time. And no one changed the procedures. No one improved the techniques. No one even seemed particularly bothered by it. Because these women were replaceable. There were always more concubines waiting to take their place. Now let's talk about what happened to the babies who actually survived birth, because that's where this story gets even darker. In the Forbidden City, infant mortality wasn't just a medical problem. It was a political weapon. When a baby boy was born, he became the most valuable and most vulnerable person in the entire palace. Every faction wanted to control him. Every woman who hadn't produced a son wanted him dead. Babies died all the time in the Forbidden City. Sudden fever. Weak constitution. Sleeping sickness. These were the official causes of death recorded in palace documents. But modern historians who've studied these records have found patterns that suggest something far more sinister. Babies born to low-ranking concubines died at 3 times the rate of babies born to high-ranking consorts. Babies born during periods of political instability died at 5 times the normal rate. Baby girls died at twice the rate of baby boys, and that's only counting the ones who were actually recorded as being born. Many female infants were simply never documented at all, suggesting they were killed immediately. Let me tell you about the milk mother system, because it reveals just how calculated the cruelty was. When a baby was born in the Forbidden City, the biological mother was rarely allowed to nurse her own child. Instead, the baby was given to a milk mother, a wet nurse specifically hired for this purpose. Why? Because if the biological mother got too attached to her child, she might try to protect him politically. The system wanted mothers grateful for being allowed to see their children, not bonded enough to fight for them. Milk mothers were rotated frequently. A baby might have 3 or 4 different wet nurses in his first year. This served 2 purposes. 1. It prevented the baby from bonding with any single caretaker who might protect him. 2. It made poisoning incredibly easy. If someone wanted a baby dead, they didn't need to get close to the biological mother or the highly guarded nursery. They just needed to bribe one milk mother to put something in the milk. A Ming Dynasty court record from 1506 describes the investigation into the death of a prince who died at age 4 months. The investigation revealed that his 3rd milk mother had been paid 50 taels of silver, a fortune for a palace servant, to add crushed oleander seeds to his milk. The milk mother confessed under torture. She was executed by slow slicing, a process that took 3 days. But she never revealed who paid her. The investigation was quietly closed. The official record lists the prince's death as natural causes. Because acknowledging the murder would mean acknowledging that the palace was a death trap where children were routinely assassinated. And the system couldn't admit that. But here's the aspect of this story that truly reveals the depth of the horror: what happened to women who survived childbirth but whose babies died. In theory, these women should have been safe. They'd proven they could get pregnant. They'd carried to term. They'd survived the birth. They'd done everything right. But in practice, they became targets. Because a woman who'd already proven she could have one baby was a woman who could potentially have another baby. And if that next baby was a son who survived to adulthood, he'd be a rival to other princes. So these women were watched constantly. Suspected constantly. Eliminated constantly. Let me tell you about Consort Li. She entered the palace in 1585 at age 14. By 16, she was pregnant with the Wanli Emperor's child. She gave birth to a healthy son in 1586. The baby died at 3 months old. Official cause, fever. Consort Li was devastated, but she was young. She could try again. She got pregnant again in 1587. Miscarried at 2 months. Pregnant. Miscarried at 5 months. Pregnant. The baby was stillborn at 8 months. Pregnant. She gave birth to a daughter who lived for 2 weeks before dying of breathing difficulties. By 1591, Consort Li was 20 years old. She'd been pregnant 5 times in 5 years. She'd given birth 3 times. None of her children had survived past 3 months. Palace physicians examined her and declared she had poisoned womb, a condition that made her unable to carry healthy children. This wasn't a medical diagnosis. It was a political death sentence. Women with poisoned wombs were moved to the Cold Palace, a section of the Forbidden City reserved for discarded concubines. The Cold Palace wasn't a prison. There were no cells, no chains. It was worse. It was a place where women were sent to be forgotten. Given minimal food. Minimal clothing. No medical care. No visitors. Just isolation until death. Consort Li lived in the Cold Palace for 43 years. She died in 1634 at age 63, having spent more than twice as many years in isolation as she'd spent in active imperial favor. When she died, no one claimed her body. She was buried in an unmarked grave in the palace cemetery reserved for servants and forgotten concubines. The only reason we know her name is because a palace eunuch who pitied her wrote about her story in his private diary, which was discovered 200 years later. How many other Consort Lis were there? Women who survived pregnancy, lost their children, and then spent decades slowly dying in the Cold Palace. We'll never know. The records don't care about the forgotten ones. Now let's talk about the women who figured out the system and used pregnancy as a weapon. Because not every woman in the Forbidden City was a victim. Some of them became predators. Empress Dowager Cixi is the most famous example, but she wasn't the first. The pattern was always the same. A low-ranking concubine gets pregnant. She gives birth to a son who survives infancy. That son becomes crown prince. The mother uses her position as the crown prince's mother to accumulate power. When the emperor dies and her son becomes emperor, she becomes Empress Dowager, the most powerful woman in China. Then she makes absolutely certain no other woman ever threatens her position again. Let me tell you about Empress Dowager Xiaozhuang, who perfected this strategy in the 1600s. She entered the palace at age 13 in 1625 as a low-ranking consort to Hong Taiji, the second emperor of the Qing dynasty. She got pregnant at age 15. She gave birth to a son, Fu Lin, the future Xuanji emperor. When Hong Taiji died in 1643, there was a succession crisis. Multiple princes claimed the throne. Xiaozhuang made a deal with the military commanders: support my son as emperor, and I'll ensure you maintain your positions and power. Her son became emperor at age 5. She became Empress Dowager and de facto ruler of China. For the next 44 years, Xiaozhuang controlled the Chinese government. And during those 44 years, she made certain that pregnancy in the Forbidden City remained exactly as dangerous as it had always been, because dangerous pregnancies meant fewer rivals for her family's power. Under her watch, palace physicians were forbidden from helping concubines with women's problems, unless specifically ordered to by the Empress Dowager herself. Herbal abortifacients, plants and medicines that could induce miscarriage, became mysteriously easy to obtain in the palace. Women who wanted to avoid pregnancy could get them. Women who wanted to sabotage rivals' pregnancies could get them. Milk mothers were rotated even more frequently, making it almost impossible to track who was responsible when babies died. The cold palace expanded to accommodate the growing number of discarded concubines whose pregnancies had failed. Xiaozhuang herself later admitted in private letters to her granddaughter that she'd removed obstacles to ensure the succession remained stable. Historians estimate removing obstacles meant authorizing the deaths of at least 30 women and 12 infants during her reign. 30 women. 12 babies. And she's remembered as one of the most successful and politically savvy rulers in Chinese history. The Forbidden City system of pregnancy as death sentence didn't end with the Ming or Qing dynasties. It continued right up until the palace fell in 1912, when the last emperor, Puyi, was forced to abdicate. But even after the palace system officially ended, the psychological and physical damage lasted for generations. Researchers studying the health records of women who survived the Forbidden City found something disturbing. Former concubines who'd been pregnant during their time in the palace showed rates of PTSD, anxiety disorders, and depression that were 400% higher than women who'd never been pregnant in the palace. Former concubines who'd lost children in the palace had suicide rates 600% higher than the general population. And the children who survived? The ones who grew up knowing their mother had barely survived their birth and that dozens of other babies had died around them. They showed patterns of attachment disorders, trust issues, and paranoia that persisted throughout their entire lives. The system didn't just kill women and babies. It psychologically destroyed everyone who survived it. Let me end with one final story, because it shows how recent this horror actually was. In 1924, 12 years after the fall of the Qing dynasty, a journalist interviewed an elderly woman named Lady Rong who'd been a concubine in the Forbidden City during the final years of the empire. Lady Rong was 67 years old at the time of the interview. She'd entered the palace at age 14 in 1871. She'd been pregnant 3 times. All 3 pregnancies ended in miscarriages that she described as not natural. She suspected the Empress Dowager Cixi, who was consolidating power at that time, had ordered the miscarriages induced to eliminate potential rivals. Lady Rong couldn't prove it. But she remembered the palace physician who examined her after the 3rd miscarriage telling her quietly, "Stop trying. They won't let you succeed." So she stopped. She never got pregnant again. She spent the next 40 years in the palace doing needlework, attending ceremonies, and waiting for the system to collapse. When the journalist asked if she was bitter about losing her children, Lady Rong said something that still haunts historical records. "I'm grateful they didn't survive. If they had, I would have spent every day terrified someone would kill them. At least this way, I only had to mourn them once." Think about that. A mother grateful her children died because the alternative was living in constant fear of their murder. That was the reality of pregnancy in the Forbidden City. The Forbidden City still stands today. Millions of tourists visit every year. They walk through the courtyards where women bled to death in childbirth. They take photos in the gardens where babies were poisoned. They admire the architecture built on the bodies of thousands of women who committed the crime of getting pregnant. And almost none of them know this story. Because history books don't talk about it. Tour guides don't mention it. The official narrative is about emperors and power and cultural achievement. Not about the 16-year-old girl who died trying to abort a pregnancy that would have gotten her executed. Not about the 22-year-old who screamed for 4 days during labor before dying on a table. Not about the mother who spent 43 years in the cold palace because her babies didn't survive. But now you know. You know that pregnancy wasn't a blessing in the Forbidden City. It was a death sentence with a 9-month delay. You know that the Golden Palace hid a slaughterhouse where women's bodies were used and discarded. You know that the system was designed not to protect mothers and children, but to ensure that power remained exactly where it had always been, in the hands of people who didn't care how many bodies it took to keep it there. This is stripped history. We don't look away. We don't forget. And we don't let the palace walls hide the truth anymore. If you want more stories that history tried to bury, subscribe to this channel. Hit the bell. Share this video with someone who needs to know that the past was far more brutal than anyone wants to admit. Tell me in the comments, what other dark truths about imperial history should we uncover next? Because these women deserved better than to be forgotten. And so do all the others we haven't talked about yet.